Hello, my name is Chris Bobbitt. I live in Vienna, Virginia, and I have CVID. Being able to say that was actually a real accomplishment for me, as it took about 15 years from the onset of symptoms to the point where I was able to get a diagnosis for all my problems. Before I was diagnosed, right before my 46th birthday, I'd been experiencing years of declining health, multiple incidents of pneumonia, untreatable GI issues. I've been diagnosed with every GI condition you can think of. Skin conditions, autoimmune problems, just the list is endless. And for each condition, I went to a specialist. I'm privileged. I make a good salary. I have very good health care. And so I was able to get excellent health care. Lots of doctors, specialists in every condition. Every doctor was frustrated with me. They would see the symptoms. They would not be able to find the underlying cause. And it came to a point where they were practically telling me I was a hypochondriac, that I was just explaining my problems or having problems that were just entirely in my head. My mental health started to deteriorate at the same time. When you're sick for so long and you can't seem to find a solution and people are telling you you're crazy, you start to think you're crazy. I reached the end of my rope, though, when I was 46, when I had a recurrence of mono. And in case you don't know, mononucleosis, if you've had it once, you're only supposed to ever have it once. If you have it twice, that's a real problem. And even my primary care physician, who I think had become jaded with me over the years, realized that there was something going on. And he suggested that I go see this in-network, sorry, look at my note. Which I got past, allergist, I'm sorry, forgot the term. And at that point, I was a little bit broken, but I was also angry. And so I really began compiling, while I was sick, what I came to call a sick book. I put every diagnosis I'd ever received, every test result I'd had a copy of, dates, and I created a chronological narrative explaining my conditions, the doctors I saw, what they said, what they found, and so on and so forth. And then I researched, instead of going to the allergist he suggested, I researched who the best allergist in the Washington area was. I didn't want to just go to a second stringer anymore. I wanted to go someone who had seen a large number of things. And I saw Dr. Bailey in Arlington, and she's a very kind woman, very thoughtful woman, very considerate person. She listened to me, which a lot of doctors have a hard time doing. And she ran a lot of tests, just generic allergy tests, but also a few specific blood tests. And most of the numbers were fine, but one number was off. Seeing her actually was a pivotal choice, because when that number was off, she knew somebody who might know what that number meant. He was a retiring infectious disease expert at Georgetown. He'd been a professor there near the end of his career. He'd seen it all, he'd done it all. And getting an appointment with him was really challenging. I waited about another month before I could get to see him. With him, I had the most unusual medical experience I've ever had in my life, the most unusual appointment. Instead of the normal poking and prodding, which doctors usually do when they see you for the first time, we just sat down in his office and we talked. We talked for most of an hour. I gave him my book. He read through it, and he asked question after question after question. And then at the end of that long interview, it wasn't really a doctor's appointment, it was an interview. He said, okay, I think I know what you might have, but I want to do a test, a single test for one particular thing to confirm my suspicion. He gave me the test. He gave me the script for the test. I went and got it done. And he said, well, come in for a follow-up. It took about a month and a half to get the follow-up appointment. And it was the longest month of my life, because I knew I was on the verge of a diagnosis. My health, of course, was still in the toilet. But I was just on pins and needles. So anyway, I had an appointment with him, and it was very brief and perfunctory. He just said, yeah, yes, I've confirmed it. You have an IgG deficiency. He says your count is in the 20s. And the normal count is between 400 and 1,600. And in the 20s, that's extraordinarily low. Anything below a couple of hundred, and usually it's a cause for concern. And I asked him, well, what do you do about this? And he says, well, I've only encountered this in the ICC. People who have this immune condition at this point, they're on death's door. He said, there's nothing you can do about it. And basically, he was telling me in that moment to prepare to die. I didn't come all this way. I didn't fight this hard to just curl up and die at this point, though. And I spent a couple of days in meltdown, and then I picked myself up and I started researching. And I didn't know what IgG deficiency meant, so I started Googling it. Thank God for the internet, I guess. 100 years ago, I would have been lost. If an expert in the field tells you there's no hope, usually there's no hope. My research into IgG led me to the IDF. It was one of the first links I followed after I started looking at the papers. The IDF gave me a provider list. I don't know if they still have it on your website, but that provider list, I would be dead without that provider list. And so I went, happened to be a doctor on that list that was 10 miles from my house. I'm so fortunate that I'm sure I know some people who visit my doctor who come hundreds of miles every month for their treatment. I'm just so lucky as it was just all so close for me. So I took my test results to this immunologist, Dr. Alpin, and he looked at it and he said, I want to confirm it. And I said, that's what I'm here for. And he ran his own test, and sure enough, he confirmed it. And he gave me a treatment plan, and he gave me hope for the first time in years and years and years. And at that point, after starting IgG infusions, IVIG, not subcutaneous, my symptoms and my problems began to decline. It was almost night and day. I had all my GI issues disappeared. I had a lot of my autoimmune diseases started to recede. I've been growing my hair long to cover my alopecia. Well, that didn't become necessary any longer. So I kind of like having a ponytail. At any rate, it was just a huge difference. I began to be able to live a more normal life. I began to be able to hope for a better future, or even have a future. Every experience you have in your life, good and bad, teaches you something. And what this experience taught me, other than to deal with my problems, is to be able to communicate my problems. The other thing it taught me, an even more critical lesson, is that you are responsible for your own health care. Doctors are well-meaning, but they tend to look at the world through tunnel vision, through their particular specialty. Very few doctors see the bigger picture, and the doctors that are trained to see the bigger picture don't know enough about rare conditions to really make a diagnosis or to see that. As IDF says, look for zebras. And I was a zebra, and I got lost in a system, even surrounded by well-meaning people. I got lost, and it wasn't until I took my own health care in, I really came to understand what I had and was able to communicate that to people and question them, to be able to talk to them not as their intellectual inferior, but as their peer, to be able to ask them about every diagnosis, every treatment, what it was supposed to do, and then to understand that for myself. It's very hard to do that, but doing that is important even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So to me, you are the owner of your own health care. You can't rely on anybody else to be your advocate. You have to be your own advocate. So that's my story.